So, welcome back to Grief is the Word. That's what I'm calling this video series in recognition of National Grief Awareness Week. And today I'm joined by three lovely ladies and we're going to be talking about diversity and inclusion in grief, because this is one of the very important themes as part of Grief Awareness Week. So I am joined by Parul Banka. She is a storytelling coach and author as well of My Cancer Journey. So yeah, thanks for giving the little wave there, Parul. I'm joined by Irene Poku, who is a wellbeing coach and also part of my bereavement network. That's how we met. And I'm also joined by Zayna Ratty, who is LGBTQIA+ and GSRD race and ethnicity hypno and psychotherapist. Did I get that right, Zayna?
Yes, I can go through the acronyms in a minute.
Fantastic. So welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for agreeing to join me here in this really important conversation. And we were just saying before we went live that actually this is one of the areas that I think is often overlooked in grief awareness, and yet actually is, you know, a really important one. But I guess it's helping people to understand why it's important. So maybe perhaps starting with that question, really, if I could throw that out as to what you feel is important about this sort of a topic within grief, and why it's important, and what is it about it that, you know, we need to help people kind of understand, I guess.
We'll just look at each other and go,
yeah,
we'll be really polite, we'll all kind of queue up. I guess, you know, what's really important is that people understand that the more diverse our communities become, the more difference there will be in rituals around grief, around loss, the more different types of loss there will be. And also about inclusion, meaning not only race and ethnicity, but also LGBTQIA+ and GSRD. Now, GSRD is gender, sex and relationship diversity. And grief is loss, and loss is the loss of lots of things. Not only have we lost lots of things this year, but we've also, you know, if you come out, for instance, or invite in, as I like to call it, you end up maybe losing some of your family. And the loss around that, the loss around coming out later in life and maybe having to reevaluate that very societal narrative of that traditional life trajectory, thank you, Jung, who kind of said, this happens, and this happens. And it doesn't always necessarily happen in that order. And that's why the more education and awareness there is around wider topics around grief and loss, the more we can all begin to understand each other better and treat each other with open, kind, loving hands.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, love that. Yeah. I know this is something you've talked about, Parul, in terms of, again, just before we came live, in this idea that, you know, it's not just about bereavement, that you have you know, your experience of loss is to do with something that sits outside of bereavement as well.
Yes, that's true. So when people think of grief, the first thing that they think of is bereavement, loss of family in terms of loss of life. But that's not the only thing that grief can be about. It can be about loss of health. It can be about loss of relationship. In my case, it started with loss of health. And so when I was diagnosed with cancer and went through the treatment and came out the other side, I just wanted different things from life. And one of the things that happened was my post-cancer life would look very different from my pre-cancer life. That was very, very certain, because of how things had changed for me and because of how I wanted my life to be going forward. And while that was exciting, and I was really excited and grateful for being here and the opportunity to have a second chance at life, it also meant that I actually lost the life that I was used to, the life that I had known for 34 years. And that felt like a loss. That felt like stripping off every single identity I had built for myself in terms of work, in terms of how I look, in terms of how I behave, what my relationships are, what my financial situation is, who am I as a person on spiritual level, all of it, really. And it takes a while to come to terms to this new person that you are aiming to become, because, hey, it involves letting go of the person that you have been so far.
Yeah. I can sort of, again, even though my experience was different and was about direct bereavement, again, I can so relate to all those other sort of, as they call, secondary losses, things that sit, outside of the primary loss, that then has that kind of ripple effect, doesn't it, on life. And I know, again, Irene, for you, you're bringing a very different experience as well to the conversation in terms of your loss.
Yes, because I've actually suffered bereavement. It was the loss of my husband. And once again, I can relate to what Parul is saying. But in my case, it's not just my loss. I've got 3 young children as well. So it's dealing with my loss and dealing with the loss of how every child is dealing with the loss of their dad, and how others are relating to us with, especially people who haven't had such a big trauma, fail to understand how to even relate or think, oh, well, a year's passed, surely you've moved on. But it takes a while. And, I think the reason we're doing this is for people to get curious, to get a better understanding.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things I love about the campaign is that, it's about normalising these conversations, isn't it, as well, as best we can. And as you said, Zayna, as well, right now, this is really significant in terms of what's going on, in life, in the circumstances around the pandemic and loss coming in all forms. It's not just, obviously, clearly there has been really significant loss in terms of bereavement and COVID deaths. And I'm actually going to be recording a different interview about that with some of the bereaved families. But then all these other senses of loss of things that are going on right now. I guess bringing it back to the theme around diversity and inclusion, I'd like to ask, what is it about? I guess maybe if we just focus on perhaps the faith and cultural sort of elements around grief. What do you think some of the kind of typical challenges are, either in your experience or maybe even experience with clients, Zayna, as well?
So there has been a tremendous amount of grief and of loss, and also around loss and grief around the plans we would have all made this year. Those anchor parts to our year that caused us to have certain points, and they've all gone. And I've really encouraged my clients to be able to emote that loss, to be able to metabolize and process the feelings around that, just as us all as therapists have had to do the same. And for me, I had a client who is trans, and they had experienced a family loss. They went along to do one of the rituals, and they queued up to perform this particular ritual, and they were double asked by the person practicing the ceremony, and said, this is for men only. And my client just looked at them and just went, yeah, I know, and performed that ritual, because actually that ritual was their gateway into beginning that grieving process. And had they have been denied it purely by the fact that they were trans, they wouldn't have been able to have accessed that particular part. People are displaced. So you've got people that are, my father is in Nigeria. He returned back there when I was 4, and I somewhat grew up outside of my culture. I grew up in the village in leafy Oxfordshire, where I still live, and you know, there are parts of that kind of cultural heritage and rituals around grief, loss and dying that I don't have. And quite often it's about encouraging clients to be able to come up with those rituals. We kind of forget how important they are, but they are so incredibly important for every area of our lives. And whatever it is, however they do it, whether you're looking at Bowlby, I use attachment a lot because obviously a lot of what I do is about relationships with others, about authentic and adaptive self, and also relationship with self. And so I use Bowlby, I use Tonkin. There are lots of methods and challenges that we have with clients right now and into the future. I don't think this is the tip of the iceberg, I think, for what we are going to be seeing around these subjects in the forthcoming years, not just a few months. So there are a tremendous amount of challenges when it comes to people being displaced, people being unable to attend funerals. And it's, I guess, something that really resonated with me just a minute ago was about spouses. And my husband had leukemia 14 years ago and thankfully recovered. However, that feeling is still there. We have a 5-year-old son together. So it's something that's still very prevalent in all of our lives, all of the time. And one of the most important things is about inviting it in, as opposed to pushing it away from ourselves. That hurt that we don't want to touch because it hurts too much.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think there's this human condition around pain and emotions and painful emotions, isn't it? That, you know, I don't want to be with this, I don't want to have it, so I want to push it away and push it down. And moving towards those emotions is really ultimately what's more helpful for us to be able to face grief. And I guess just going back to that example of that that client that you were working with, then it's really difficult anyway to be going through that grieving process. But I guess if you then got added kind of challenges or things that are cropping up along the way, you know, how you're trying to sort of deal with your grief, and then perhaps a sense of a lack of support or a lack of understanding from people around you, that must make it, you know, really difficult, even more so.
Absolutely, it does. I always say to clients, we don't have an emotional plug hole. What goes in stays in, and if we don't metabolize it, it will fill you up, it will consume you. I have, because of the types of areas I work in, I work with lots of people who have neurodivergency. Neurodivergency and ADHD are precursors and give a more likelihood of complicated grief because of the way of processing emotions. So it adds complication over complication over complication.
And if I could just bring you in, Parul and Irene, as well, in terms of, you know, whether you've had any of these sort of experiences for yourselves, because you're obviously talking about first-hand experience.
Yeah, to add to what Zayna said, I think that, you know, sometimes it's what you want to do compared, you know, as opposed to what others expect of you, and vice versa. I think for me, the experience is, well, culturally, this is how we do this, but I don't understand that culture. I'm dealing with it the best way that I can, and it's for the awareness for the people around us to be able to understand that the best way or the best person to deal with it is the person going through it, and to respect how the individual wants to deal with it without really trying to impose on them at a time which is really difficult for them. So, you know, it goes either way. If I want to do something because I think it will make me feel good, I feel that should be respected, and nobody should impose on me what they think is the right way to do stuff.
Yeah. So I guess like belonging to you know, certain faiths and cultures can be a really positive experience, but I'm also hearing that it might actually create expectations around how
Yes.
you're expected to grieve.
Exactly.
Yeah. What about you, Parul?
Well, that is true. There is definitely a cultural expectation to how we are supposed to grieve. For example, in my culture, we have the concept of reincarnation. So when somebody dies, they go on to live in a different form. And so when that happens, it's a part of a culture that when somebody goes, then we grieve for through rituals and through things that we do for about 2 weeks, and then people have this understanding that now it's time to get on with your life, which doesn't always happen, because my guess is when that time frame of 2 weeks was set up, whenever it was set up ages ago, centuries ago, that there was a purpose to it. But then people get so busy doing things that they don't really have time to grieve, and they are really busy, and people are visiting, and people are there for them. But when those 2 weeks finish, then they are on their own, and often it is then that the grief comes and hits them. But at that moment, they don't have that much support or any support available, to be honest.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I've also heard, of experiences almost to the sort of opposite of that, where the experience culturally is that they're so surrounded by people for a real length of time. This can go on for, weeks and weeks, that they actually don't feel they've even got enough space or the ability to create that space for their own grief, or to stop and kind of process the loss, which is also really interesting as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's also an expectation to just get on with things, because it's a cultural thing that you don't mull over that thing that's consuming you, grief in this case. And so you've got to get up, because everything's perishable, everything, wherever it comes from the source, and it merges back into the source. That's one of the key philosophies of the faith that I follow. And that is why it is expected that people would just get on with things, which is useful at a practical level, but it can be hard to implement because everybody is different. And there is really no time limit to grief. We cannot say that we'll grieve for a week or 2 weeks or 6 months or a year, and then we are done.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the most I don't know whether it's a misconception, but I know that people struggle, and a bit like you were talking about the emotional aspects, it's like this expectation sometimes people place on themselves about, I should be kind of over this now, this should be done by now, or putting some kind of time reference around it. Again, really kind of creating that bit of pressure.
It's almost saying that there's a kind of a conveyor belt to it, and you get on at the bottom and it begins, and then you go up it, and then you go out of it. And that's something that I use being a hypnotherapist and a psychotherapist. I use lots of kind of visions and representations and metaphors. And one thing that I do around, and it came from Tonkin, about this kind of growing around grief kind of idea, and how and I think I've seen it done with a button, I think, but then I thought, well, why would a button be in a room? So I do it with the light switch. And I say, when this has just happened and you're going into that shock, if you're using Wellbeing, you go into that shock, and it's like being a tiny, tiny room with a light switch. And every time you touch that light switch, you get a shock. And what I talk about is how you move further away and your life grows around, the room gets bigger. So it doesn't mean the light switch disappears. It'll probably always be there. And in fact, we need light switches in rooms. But the point is that you don't get shocked as often as you do. But you may still get shocked, still in the room. You're not in a different room. You don't move to a different house. It's with you. And having those kind of imagery around, okay, so it's here and it's always here, and I don't necessarily have to be through and over it, which is just, why are you not over it by now? Well, hang on a minute, because I don't think you do. You know, I grew up with my grandmother, and I lost her. The last day I saw her was my 21st birthday. And it absolutely devastated me. Now, I miss her 22 years later, nearly, yeah, as much as ever. And she is as present with me as ever. But because I've moved through those stages of the shock and the denial and the anger and the bargaining to an acceptance that she is always a part of me. And I think it's really healthy for us to talk about people who we have lost. Don't hide them away. Don't hide it away from children. Don't, because this is a part of life. And a lot of my clients, the acceptance of mortality and of death facilitates them to live more, to live better, to live the life that they might have been so fearful of living previously.
Yeah, I absolutely love that model as well. It's one of my favourites. It's one of the ones that really made sense to me in terms of the fact that, and it actually almost gave me permission to, you know what, I don't need to fully find a way to get over this. It's just, and like you say, an acceptance of the fact that it is there and it'll always be there to some extent, but you can be with it and grow around it. So yeah, something just came up then as well about, I was going to ask a question and it's gone out of my head about culture and religion. And oh, that was it. So do you think there are sort of like, how open, or are there kind of some challenges around, like, you know, how open people are in certain kind of cultures and faiths about normalizing grief and talking about it, or is it still in some cultures that taboo as well?
I think it may not be so much about what is a taboo in which culture, but it can also be the behavior of the people could be driven by what is valued in the society as a culture. For example, in my culture, there is a lot of emphasis on being strong and understanding and taking the vicissitudes of life, the ups and downs of life in its stride. And the whole thing about death and mortality, it's a part of life. And that's the understanding that we grew up with, that everybody dies. And it's just a matter of when. And therefore, there is this expectation that we have of each other and of ourselves, that because it's a part of our life, then there is no need to make such a big deal about it because it's the normal. And so if there was somebody who was making, let's say, a big deal about it, then they would be, people would wonder what's going on, which kind of puts people into boxes and labels, doesn't it? When that happens, people stop talking about things. And what is normal actually tends to become abnormal because not enough people are talking about it, and it's all hush-hush, because just because somebody isn't talking about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah. It sort of struck me when Zayna was talking about, you know, talking to our children or future generations about it and being more open about it. And I wonder, Irene, if you've got any kind of thoughts on that as well, because you are a parent, is that right?
Yes, yeah. Yes. I think that the society has several expectations of widowhood or bringing up children who've lost their parent. But from my point of view, sometimes there are certain cultures that I probably, like from my background of my parents, you know, telling me, oh, this is how Ghanaians do things. There's so many things I did not understand, and I wasn't willing to follow it just to please people. And consequently, I have done what has felt right for me. And just like Zayna said, I have been very open with my children. We talk about my husband a lot because we lived daily with him. You know, the life was so intertwined that I can't foresee us just forgetting about him. I make sure that there's always open dialogue, especially as children deal with it at different levels. Some dealt with it immediately, others waited for years before they were started to show any emotions. So for me, I think that it's respecting how I want to deal with it, and I don't allow any other, external forces to, tell me this is how it has to be dealt with. I go with how I feel. And it's very liberating, because if I want to cry, I'll cry. If I want to, whatever I want to do, I do it. And I invite my children to do the same.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and it is really good to hear that you felt able to just, do things your way, and almost I suppose go against the grain a little bit, and just find your own way with it, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's what has helped me deal with it. I didn't listen to what the steps that I had to follow, because I think there's numerous steps that I had to go through in order to grieve properly. But I disagreed, and I have, everyone around me, I made them aware that this is how I want to deal with it, and this is how I want to, be open with my children and allow them to express their feelings, such that every child can talk about how they feel freely. And I have noticed that, different children feel different, their feelings vary. And whenever a particular child is going through a crisis period, I support them without having to think that it has to be done in a particular way.
Yeah. I think it's almost like loss is a huge life lesson as well, isn't it, in a way? Like it certainly has been for me, in terms of changing some of my own kind of behavioural patterns and responses to things, and how I kind of approach life in general, and then therefore how I can teach my children as well. I think that's really big kind of positive experience in a way. So I guess, Zayna, there might be people out there though, and perhaps some clients that you've worked with that maybe don't feel as able to kind of just express in their own way, and perhaps because of their community that they're in, maybe feeling like they need to kind of behave or respond in a certain way in their grief.
Yeah, absolutely. You get people who, and that's when we kind of work together to create rituals which fit them, which suit them. And because there needs to be a certain amount of, particularly if you're still within that community, of you kind of almost towing the line. And particularly if you're feeling really insecure in yourself and not able to be confident and go, actually, I want to do this, and so therefore I'm going to do this. And so we make what we call micro compromises. Okay, we will do this, but then I will do this for me. And I think it's such an incredibly personal path, that if we just are kind of blindly following everybody else's, then it's not a personal grief response for us. It's somebody else's grief response projected onto us. And, clients present, and we will find issues from long deep in the past. And we know they stay there. I had an experience when I was pregnant with my first child. I began to have dreams, and my grandmother was still around then. And I said, look, I'm having these dreams, and and she said, okay, so what's in the dreams? I said, I'm in a churchyard. I'm in a churchyard, and I'm not very old, and it's our local churchyard, so I knew the setting of it. And it was my great grandmother's funeral that I was describing. And I was 4 when they took me to that funeral. I spent a great deal of time with my grandmother. She used to look after me, and go around and fill me with sweets as grandparents. It's the law. And it was coming back to me in a way around family, in a way around what was important to me at the time. And to be able to have that space to go, look, I'm feeling this, I'm experiencing that, I'm dreaming this, and to know that that is met with safety, with security, of being able to communicate. Not everybody has that. So we have to begin looking at chosen family as opposed to given family. Where can you find your support network who will enable you to process that grief and loss how you need to process it?
Yeah, I call it my found family as well. Like, yeah, because I mean, in my experience, obviously, I lost both my parents as well, so that's a huge chunk of the immediate support that I would have turned to. So having that found family, those people that I knew would be trusted and, you know, support me in the way that I needed, not the way that they think I needed, was just so important. And also wanted to just ask, kind of on that note, really, I suppose to you, Parul, as well, what would have made a difference to you, or was there something that you kind of, you know, when you look back on your experience of grief, thinking, if only I'd have had, you know, a little bit more of that, or, you know, something that would have been really helpful?
I think people are kind and they want to help. It's just that they don't know how to help. And one of the things that can start changing that is having conversations like this. For example, in my experience of going through cancer, cancer is still seen as something which is shameful and attracts a lot of taboo and stigma in the culture that I come from. And because of that, people don't really speak about cancer. When somebody goes through it, they often go into hiding and their family doesn't speak about it. But if you look at it at a cultural and a social level, it means that there aren't any stories about cancer out in the open. I lived in India for 32 years of my life, and would you believe that I had never interacted with somebody who had been touched by cancer? Not because it doesn't exist, but because people don't talk about it. And because of that, it becomes that hush, 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 pink elephant in the room. And nobody wants to talk about it. And despite the fact that people have their best intentions at heart and they want to help people, be there for them, they just don't know where to begin. And I think it's a case of not knowing, and then a lot of them end up saying the wrong things that they shouldn't be saying to somebody who's going through the process or grieving. And it's just one big mess. And so in order to change that, conversations like these, normalizing, telling people that it is okay, you don't have to be strong all the time. And it's okay to just say that you need help, or it's okay to say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. Even those basics are going to start making a huge difference.
And it just sounds so simple, doesn't it? When we say it like that, it's just literally a conversation, like human to human.
Exactly, because that's what we need, right? I mean, I wasn't expecting anyone to take my cancer away because I knew it wasn't in their power. Nobody had that power. But what I wanted was, if I wanted to speak to somebody, can somebody listen to me? Or can somebody not look at me and turn their eyes away because they just didn't know what to say to me?
Yeah.
That's all I wanted, and that's all I needed.
What about you, Irene, in your experience? Is there something that you think would have made a difference?
I think people being open-minded, just curious, just listening, because most of the time when people are in such a situation, they just want to talk and express their feelings. So a question like, how are you feeling? Will bring out how I'm actually feeling. And then based on what I say, what comes out, you may say, I could help you with this specific offer, offer specific help, rather than say, a lot of people said to me, oh, if you need anything, call me, if you need anything, and so many, and then I forget, but those that said to me, I can take your children to school, I can do this. Those were the people that I felt comfortable to call on.
Yeah.
And those who were listening attentively to what I was saying about how I was feeling, and consequently offering the right sort of help to help me deal with my issues.
Yeah, that's such an important point, isn't it? That there are, you know, it's the intent behind the question as well. How are you feeling? Is it that you want me to say I'm okay or I'm fine and don't really want to go there? Or do you really want to know how I'm feeling, you know, and somebody who can create that space for you to actually feel able to open up and really say what you need and how you're feeling it just makes such a big difference. Yeah.
Yes. If you are going to ask me how I'm feeling, then keep quiet and listen to what I'm saying.
And don't try to fix the situation, please.
Exactly. Just listen.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this has been such a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed having you ladies on together. It's been fantastic. I'd really love to just finish up really by perhaps if you were to just offer kind of a tip or some words of wisdom for people out there right now. I guess particularly if they might be feeling some of the struggles around some of the challenges with diversity and inclusion. What would you say? What would that be?
I would say that you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to do anything alone, really. Ask for help. There's a lot of help available. There's professional help available, and there are people who genuinely want to help. So you don't have to make it harder than it needs to be.
I would say check in with yourself, because I think during these periods we just go with the flow without really stopping to ask ourselves, how am I feeling? What's going on for me? Am I comfortable with what's going on? And once you check in with yourself, if something isn't quite right, then you ask yourself, how may I change this? Is it support? Is it talking to somebody? Is it just sleeping? Is it crying? So the checking is very important, because when you become self-aware, it's only then that you can help yourself.
I guess I would say talk. Find someone to talk to, and find someone who will listen, and listen without assumption. Quite often we will assume what somebody else is thinking, feeling, and we then act accordingly, instead of being open and honest and transparent and really finding out how they're feeling, how they're doing. And always remember, there is no expiry date on grieving. Okay, it's a best before, it's a movable feast.
Thank you. So reach out and reach in as well is also what I'm hearing, and yeah, just to talk and just be, I guess, true to whatever it is that, you know, your experience of grief is, and finding a way to sort of express that. And definitely agree with Zayna about, you know, talking and reaching out to somebody, whether that's a friend or a family member, but also, you know, professional support as well. So thank you so much, ladies. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. So thank you.
Thank you, Louise.
Thank you.